Oops. Hey folks, going to start up in a minute. Got my events all started. And where are my notes? Over here. G'day everybody! Welcome to Comp 1720/6720, Thursday, week 11. It's getting close now. We're in the home run for this course. The home run. We're going to go through some more concepts related to simulations, dynamics, and artificial life today. Not the longest lecture we'll have, I think. As we're sort of getting around to the final parts of the course, I'm just going to ping everyone on the team and see if we have a few people who want to join. Starting now. Join in. I can see there's a small number of you on the YouTube and on the Twitch. Thank you so much for joining me today. Of course, things get a bit hairy towards the end of the semester. Everyone has assessment tasks, not least of which is the assessment for this course, the major project assessments. So I guess a few things to talk about, a few admin issues. I'll just go to my admin slide. Well, back to the positive affirmations. I have started my major project. I have committed my latest work to GitLab. I have been adding to my statement of originality as I go. I have looked at my MP at the test URL. When I need help, I ask on the forum. We feel better. A few great people are out there asking questions on the forum, making comments, having great ideas. Look, we've had these 2 weeks or 3 weeks now of quite detailed work within your labs of developing your major project. The lab times change for next week. The lab session changes to being an optional lab, just to come in and get some help or show off your major project to your tutors and your peers. There's no pre-lab or lab tasks next week. It's just a help session for the major project. And really, we're sort of switching over from the place where we were actively helping you to develop your idea to the next week and a half, where you are going to be just developing your major project on your own and producing something really exciting for us. And I'm so much looking forward to seeing what everyone in the class comes up with. I get to mark every single one of your major projects, and it's a task which I look forward to, even though it takes me quite a long time to get through the whole class, but I really look forward to it. Seeing the range of creativity in this class is just wonderful. You'll see that you had your feedback from assignment 3 back. I hope that will help you to frame what you're doing in your major project. Both good feedback telling you what you're good at and what you're doing well, and potentially some criticism saying what needs to improve in order to take yourself to your full potential. And I really hope that folks are looking at that feedback, thinking a little bit about what they can use from their assignment 3 experience and build into their major project. A little bit of a chat. I'm not going to show a slide about this, but we did have a student feedback survey that just went in. The course reps, wonderful course reps, have ran another survey. We had a few responses. There were 14 responses from that one, and I was happy to get that many at this late stage of the semester. The course feedback really, it goes along with the CELT at this stage as being kind of a view across the whole course. But just a few things I'll mention is that broadly the folks who filled in that survey were satisfied with the workload over the course, which I'm happy about. There was some concern that the folks who didn't have the coding background were struggling in some of the labs. I know that that's a concern. It's certainly difficult to pitch a lab that will hold some interest for folks who do have a coding background or are studying computer science at the same time, as well as those without the coding background. But I think that if you contrast the labs with the assessment tasks, the assessment tasks are open-ended and they meet you where you are. So if you don't want to use objects and constructors and complicated JavaScript features in your major project, you don't have to. There's a lot of earlier parts of the course that cover the basics of structured programming that you can access. And I know that particularly getting to the week 7 and 8 labs, they do get a little bit more complicated, or a lot more complicated, to be honest. And hopefully, having had this few weeks of constructive work on the major project, you feel confident in being able to use the skills you've learned to realize what you want to artistically. We did have some, I'll just pick out a few more points to make. I think I've taken on board any statements people made about workload in labs. Of course, every year we try to adjust things and make tweaks. And potentially one thing we could do in next year's course would be to make it clear that not all of those lab exercises are required to have passed the lab in some sense, and make some of them sort of extra tasks that students might want to get into if they're keen on it. Look, the feedback at this point, obviously we can't change the assessments you've done in this course, but I certainly appreciate getting feedback that can help us shape how we develop this course in future, because courses are always being developed. And this course is now, I think this is the 10th year that it's run. 10 years of Comp 1720. So it's a long-term investment. Things have changed over that time and they continue to change. Now, let's get back to our topics. Oh, I've lost my team. I was hoping that someone would ask me a question at some point, so I've got to have my team up. Well, Julian's there, one of the tutors. So Julian, you can ask me a question if you want to. We went through all this stuff about major projects, blah, 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 blah. You can work all that out, remember what to do. We're going back to inspiration from nature. We talked about this game of life last lecture, and we're going to go into another kind of simulation, another exciting one called flocking and Boids. So I'll skip the ball model. That was a lot of fun. The game of life, we did that. And now we're going to look at Boids and flocking. This is another classic artificial life concept of making a little organism in some way and then creating lots of them and putting them into an ecosystem and seeing how they interact. Whereas in Game of Life, it was about organisms that could only really do one thing. They could live and die, and then the ecosystem itself creates this emergent behavior. In this version, there will be little creatures of some form that can fly around the screen and interact with each other. So this is a concept, I suppose, generated by a computer graphics scientist called Craig Reynolds in 1986. And the idea was to develop sort of a simulation of a bird or a creature that would act in a flock and would avoid an obstacle. So Craig Reynolds came up with this concept of a Boids, which was the simulated creature. And you can see here an image of these little triangles flying around the screen and interacting with these columns that are sitting there. So it's a simulation of coordinated animal motions, birds, fish, etc. There's a paper linked here which you can go and check out. And these generic little creatures are called Boids, represented by little triangles. So this is widely discussed as a good example of an artificial life concept that shows the emergence of complex behavior from simple rules. We talked about this last lecture, the emergence from the game of life of new kinds of meta-life forms, groups of groups of cells that would act independently or appear to act independently. With the Boids, it's something which looks more like a natural phenomena. It's mirroring the natural world. The behaviors which we have aren't the same as the cellular automata behaviors, but they're things that control how these little Boids move in space. So each Boid moves, it has a direction and a speed, and they have simple steering behaviors, 3 simple behaviors. One's called separation, one's called alignment, and one's called cohesion. So we'll have a look at these 3 behaviors, and then we'll have a look at some code and try to break it down a bit and see what's happening. So each Boid, one Boid has a direction and a velocity, and it's always moving around the world. And each Boid can steer left and right by an angle, steer left or steer right. So if its heading is 0, then it can go 90 degrees this way or minus 90 degrees that way. And then each Boid will have a small neighborhood around it where it can sense the other Boids and sense where they are. So here's the one Boid and its little neighborhood here. And we're going to define the separation is the concept which will say don't crowd. So it means adjust my direction so that I'm avoiding nearby Boids. So in this circle, we've got 3 Boids, each represented by a vector. This vector is short, so it's close to that one. These vectors are further away. And because of these 3 vectors, we're doing a little bit of maths to generate a reaction vector. So to separate from the other Boids, that Boid's going to want to turn and move towards that vector. Its heading will move that way. Next concept, alignment. A Boid wants to move in the same direction as other Boids in its neighborhood. So if all the other Boids are moving in this vector, that's all of their headings, then my Boid will want to adjust its heading a little bit to the left. So the way this works is that we calculate the average of all of these vectors, all of these velocity vectors, and adjust my velocity vector to approach that average. So if everyone's moving this way and I'm moving this way, then I'll want to turn myself to go in the direction of everybody else. So we've had separation, alignment. Third one is cohesion. That means I want to move to the center of a group, which sort of it conflicts with separation a little bit. So I guess there's a balance between those two concepts. So I'm going to find the average position of a nearby group of Boids and aim towards that. So I don't want to be too close to everyone else, but I want to be among them. I want Boids to be all around me. Obviously, if you're in a flock, the safest place to be is somewhere in the middle so that a predator isn't going to eat you. If you're on the outside, you could potentially get eaten or vacuum cleaned or hunted by a human. So being in the middle of that flock will be a safe place to be. Okay, we're up to the Boids demo. I've got two versions here. There's an example on the P5 website. Here's Dan Schiffman's Boids, and I've somewhat borrowed from Dan Schiffman's example to put it into the P5 editor, where we can have a go at changing things around. By the way, if you want to go through this code in very great detail and learn all about it, I think there's a chapter about it in natureofcode.com. Read the entire book for free. Where's the Boids chapter? Autonomous agents, probably. Particle systems, cellular automata. Oh no, now I'm back here. Boid. Here's all the Boids. Cohesion, separation, alignments. You can go through here in great detail and see how these could be arranged. I'm not going to go into this in much more detail than I've just done, except that now we can have a look at the code. So here's my Boids code, and I've got one Boid going through space, and when I drag my mouse, it's going to add a few Boids around. So I'll just make a few. There's too many. Make a couple. You can see now I've got two flocks, this flock here and this other one. And because they're actually a bit far away from each other, they're not interacting that much. But if they start to get closer, you'll see that this guy, now we've got another one that's caught up with those. So now we've got a group of 2 and a group of 4. And over time, as they pass close to each other, they influence each other a little bit. And maybe if we're lucky, they'll all turn together. But so far we haven't been. I'll make a few more. This extra group is going to change things because they now form a bigger cohesive unit. Whoops. Now they're all joined together. I think we've got one. Oh no, they split. So there's a balance between that separation and cohesion unit. And I guess if we make the cohesion too high, I think that they're very likely to just all clump together in a group. And if we have a nice balance, then they mostly clump, but sometimes one escapes because it's got a little bit of energy that can propel it somehow away from the group because of the separation criteria. Let's have heaps of Boids. Boids all over. So now we get something which looks really lifelike, doesn't it? This looks like little groups of fish. If you ever look down into a lagoon or at the beach when there's groups of small fish acting together as a flock. and potentially there's multiple groups working together, all trying to keep together as a group, splitting up, joining together over time. One of them every now and then splits off and joins another group or gets lost. If we fill the whole world with Boids, I wonder what everything starts to get slowed down. Of course, my simulation relies on being able to process or go through a big for loop over every Boid and sense the other Boids around it. So that means that for each Boid has to go through a for loop of every other Boid to work out how close they are. So if I add too many Boids, the whole thing's going to get very slow. We'll stop that. And I might start again just with one Boid, so I can keep that there. Let's have a look at the code. I'm not going to develop the code from scratch here, but I might do some updates today, because I think last year when I was looking at this, we're using that class, the class method, or fake classes in JavaScript. And I think I decided I don't like fake classes. I want to do this with object constructors instead, so we can convert it from classes to object constructors. I'm just going to check my restream and see, is anyone watching me? Still got a few, so I guess it's worth to keep going. Here we are. So I've got my canvas. I've got what I'm going to call a flock. That'll be my group of Boids. And I'm going to add an initial Boid into this system, just one. So for let I equal 0, I less than 1, I plus plus. Let a B equal a new Boid with this at this location, and I'm going to add that to my flock. So, and in the draw loop, I'm not going to do too much. I'm just going to draw the background, and I'm going to run the flock, do whatever it is that the flock has to do. So this is an example of this design pattern where we kind of delegate the behaviors to an object. So the flock object is going to know how to run itself. Whereas in other examples we've done, the draw object, the draw function would have done all of the work. So in some sense we don't need the flock object that much. We could be doing this in draw, but it's just handy to have an object that can organize itself. So the next function is the mouse dragged function, which, as we saw before, just adds Boids to this flock, using this typical way of constructing objects, which is cool. So let's have a look at this flock class, and maybe we can change that to being an object constructor style. Function class flock, it's got the constructor function. This dot Boids is an empty array, and then another function called add Boid, and then a run function, which will go through every Boid in the array, and then do this dot Boids I dot run on this dot Boids. So every Boid in the array will have to run itself. So the Boid itself will calculate its own cohesion, alignment, and separation, and adjust its heading. So that's fairly simple. Let's change this to being a constructor style flock. It's going to be an empty parameters there. And the first thing it's going to do is make an empty array for the Boids. Then I will add a function here. This dot add Boid is going to be this function. Oh, I think I've got this confused now. How do I do that? I have to go to my one last week and remember how to do it. What did we do with the creating my Child's Life 2021? Here we go. I don't know if I had any, oh, I didn't have any objects in that one. It was the bouncing ball that had objects, didn't it? Oh yeah, that's the correct way, the correct syntax. Function, parameters, and then the body. Okay, we can go back and do this properly now. Open Charles Boids 21. This dot add Boid equals function with one parameter b, and that's the function body. Okay, and this dot run equals function, no parameters. We can structure this a bit better. If we've got an array, we can do a for of array. Let b of this dot Boids b dot run this dot Boids. Okay, so far so good. This should be a slightly clearer, in my view, a more JavaScripty way of using this flock function. We'll see if it still works. Oh, everything seems to still work, so that's good. Now we need to go through the Boids object, which is a little bit more complicated. Here's the Boids object. Whoa, that's a lot of stuff. And there's even more stuff there. Is there anything after that? No, just those, all of those different functions as part of our Boid class. So we'll go through them in order. Let's do that. Function Boid xy, and it should have its constructor code here. I'll just get this aligned correctly. So we've got an acceleration for each Boid. We've got a velocity for each Boid. We've got a position for each Boid. So this is a step more complicated than our bouncing ball last week, last lecture, which only had position and velocity. We've got this dot r. I've forgotten what this dot r is, but I'm sure it'll come together. I'll be reminded of what it is. We've got a measure of what the maximum speed is for each Boid. The maximum speed is going to be 3. I suppose that doesn't have to be an instance variable. We could have it as a global variable. Boid max speed equal 3, and even have that as a const, so it can't be changed over time, but let's not worry about that. We'll leave it the way it is. And the maximum steering force, so the maximum change in its heading, its velocity vector moving around, is going to be 0.05. So that's handy because we want some control over how slowly the Boid will, or how quickly the Boid can possibly turn towards the flock. If they can turn instantly, then it's not going to be much fun to watch them work. We'll experiment with these values in a minute. So let's see what happens when a Boid is run. We'll make this a function as well. Function, oh, that's not quite correct. This dot run equals function Boids blah. So we've got the run function. The first thing it does is run flock. So that's probably going to do all of its cohesion, separation, alignment calculations. Then do some updating of its positions. Then I don't know what borders does, and then render. So render will draw it. Here's the flock function. So far, so good. This is fairly simple, but of course we're hiding the complexity in some lower functions. So this dot flock equals function Boids. And the way this will work is that our acceleration is going to be affected by those separation, alignment, and cohesion requirements. We're not actually changing the velocity directly. The velocity is going to be changed by the acceleration, and the acceleration vector is going to be adjusted by those requirements. So that's how much I want to turn away, how much I'm going to turn away over the next few drawing steps. And it keeps changing every drawing step because it keeps getting updated. So I've run the flock function. Now we'll just look at what the update function is. This is where we're sort of doing the physics calculation. This dot update equals function. So I've already calculated my new acceleration, And now all I have to do is add my acceleration to my velocity. And now I'm using the P5 vector command. So a vector can be, you can add them together easily with .add. You can limit them, you can multiply them together, and it just makes things easier if you're using the properties of these objects or the methods that they provide. So we'll add the new acceleration to the velocity. Then we limit the velocity by max speed, so it can't go above a certain magnitude. That's handy. Then we add our velocity to our position, and then we are zeroing out our acceleration. So we're not changing that. We start with a 0 in each time step and build up a new acceleration based on the separation, alignment, and cohesion. Okay, now we do borders. Oh, I know what borders is. The borders is what lets our Boid go from transportate itself from the one edge of the screen to the other. So if it goes off the left-hand edge, it appears again at the top right of the right-hand side. So if, I'll change this to a property function. I don't know why I've got a space there. I'm not sure what the most correct way of writing that is. I should have some, most correctly, I should have some semicolons there. So if this dot position dot x is less than this dot r, what is that? Then I add it to the other side. This dot r, what is r? I've really forgotten what r is supposed to be. Oh, maybe it's like there's an edge. We're not quite doing our border at 0. It has to go a little bit across the edge before it can transportate itself across to the other side. So if it's less than this dot r, it kind of appears on the other side with a little bit of a border as well. So it makes it feel like there's some space outside the area. If we made it just appear on the other side as soon as it touched it, then it would sort of disappear and appear on the other end. It would look like it's teleporting. So this way, it doesn't look like it's teleporting. It looks like it's going to cross the border, and then in a second or half a second after that, another Boid will appear. So you're not quite connecting the same Boid, particularly when there's a flock. That's a good trick to make it feel more coherent. Now we'll do this dot render. So we've checked the borders, transported any Boids to the other side if they have to be transported, and now we're going to render our little triangle. Not too hard to render a little triangle, but it's got to make a shape, and we've got to rotate it. So we'll work out our heading. It's going to be theta will be our heading. You can get the heading or the direction of a velocity in radians from the velocity, any velocity object, any P5 vector object will give you a direction. Fill 127, stroke 200, push a drawing context, do a translation to turn ourselves around to the correct heading, rotate to the heading, begin a shape, draw a little triangle, end shape. Not too complicated. Oh, the R is the size of I'll put it in a comment. Size of the Boid. We have huge Boids. Or we could make random sized Boids. Ooh, that's a good trick. We'll do that in a minute. This dot render. Okay, now we get to work out the steering and the separation, alignment, cohesion parts of this. So there's this other one called seek here. That's sort of making it want to seek towards the mouse potentially, which is a good idea. We'll do that later. We'll start with separate. This dot separate equals function. So remember that the separate method is going to check for nearby Boids, and then steer away from them. So probably there's a smarter way to do this, because it looks like that for each Boid we're doing 3 for loops that go over every other Boid, which is potentially problematic. We've got a few more constants here about desired separation. Then we create a steering vector and have some kind of count of the local area of Boids, which will let us take an average. So we're going to go through every other Boid. I'm going to do this in a better way. Let's, for let B of Boids, B dot position. So we find the distance between this Boid's position and another Boid's position. And if it's greater than 0, if it's 0, then I'm talking to myself. I don't need to do that. If D is greater than 0 and D is less than desired separation, then we will work out the difference, work out a vector pointing away from that neighbor. So we'll find a new vector pointing away from me, which will be by subtracting this position minus B's position, the other Boid. Then we'll normalize that and weight it by the distance, then add it to my steering vector and keep track of how many Boids I've been looking at. And then after that, I'll take the average of all of those Boids, all of the ones in the local, my local area. And there's a few more calculations just to work out which of those, how to react my steering heading towards that or away from that separation vector. Okay, now the other ones, align.boids, that should be a function as well. This dot align boids equals function boids. Again, this one does a for loop through every Boid, which is not that great. Let B of Boids B dot position, B dot velocity. So I'm just going to find the average velocity of every local Boid or every nearby Boid in the system. D greater than 0 and D less than neighbor dist. We'll add our velocity together to this velocity sum, count that as we go, and then do a similar bit of maths to add that arranged vector together. Similarly, cohesion, we'll track this one too. Oh, this is getting to be a long program, isn't it? Function equals function at Boids. Neighbor dist is 50, same thing. Create an empty vector. I want this to be another for of loop. Let B of Boids. So I find the average location of all nearby Boids and then calculate a steering change towards that location. So that's handy. Now I guess it's good that I've got these separate because I can pick them apart or remove some over time. Let's see if my Boids still work first. Uh-oh. Got some kind of problem. Seek. Ah, I haven't done that seek behavior. Whoops. I need to implement that too. So it's just going to steer choosing a point in space, it will steer my Boid towards that target. This dot seek equals function target. And that one doesn't have any for loops in it, which is good. Now I can see if my Boids will work. Oh, they work. All right. Now let's mess with the Boids. Let's remove some of these steps. This code, I'm just going to put it straight in the collection, so you can check this out if you would like. You know, fiddle with it, learn from it, see if there's anything you want to change, if you wish. What if we only separate? Let's try that, just separating. So they all want to go in different directions now. If I make a little gaggle, they want to keep moving everywhere else. That's neat, isn't it? What if I only make them do alignment? So I've got my three. They all want to go in the same direction. They're sort of flocking now, which is kind of neat, but they don't come close together. Now they've gone in a little fleet. We'll see if they all turn into a little fleet again. What really makes the Boids a nice model is the fact that there's competing requirements. And that gives you, even though they're fairly simple, a little bit of maths involved, but fairly simple requirements that pull against each other. So it means that the behavior looks natural. You can't easily explain how it occurs, particularly when you've got quite a few Boids. If we use part of this code, sure, reference me, reference the originator of the code, which was Craig Reynolds in 1986. I know I've written the lecture and I am marking your assignment, so I will know. But you can certainly use this for inspiration and take it in your own direction. Just referencing Boids, it's a very common concept. I'll know what you're talking about. There's a great conference called the Artificial Life Conference. There's people talking about Boids still, and it's many years later, 35 years since 1986. You could, if you're looking at Dan Schiffman's code in particular, sure, reference him. You can look at my code, reference me. You can look at Craig Reynolds' code, reference him. Look at someone else's code and reference them. It's up to you, but just make sure you reference someone. Okay, what about just cohesion? This should be like a feeding frenzy. So it's like I've thrown some food into the water. They all want to eat the food, and they're getting a little frenzy. Sometimes they manage to escape and join another group. Oh, that's weird, isn't it? Cool. What if we just have two of them? So I'm going to have I'm going to have cohesion and separation. So those two together. So they want to be together, but they don't want to be too close. But ironically, that seems to make them form a smaller cluster. A bigger cluster, I mean. Because they're not... maybe they're not turning as fast to join each other. Weird. Okay, what about cohesion and alignment? Those will pull each other against each other, won't they? Now they want to work as like a little arrow through space. They just want to live on top of each other. That's funny. What about alignment and separation? Always directing to the mouse. I'd have to this.seek that's right. Vector mouse X, mouse Y, I think that will do. Let's see if this works. No, it doesn't seem to work. Yeah, I've forgotten how to do that. They don't seem to be seeking. Have I done it wrong? Steer towards a target. Just have my one guy. Doesn't seem to react, do they? I think I've broken my Boids. Oh, that one's awake now. That's weird. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that. Anyway, we can add that to the code later. Find this in the collections folder, and send me an update about how to make it to go to the mouse in the forum later. That would be cool. Anyway, Boids, they're They're a lot of fun. And they show some real, don't they show this really interesting dynamism? I could look at them for a long time. Ooh, Boids of different sizes. What about we make them slightly different sizes? Random. We'll make some little ones and some big ones. A few mega Boids and a few micro Boids. And maybe slightly different. We'll give them a this dot color equals dot color. I just want them to have a random kind of light gray. That's not right. It's this dot color. Whoops. Always made a mistake in Australian. Oh, still haven't got this right. P5 color. I thought it was a function. Color? Here we go. I know they got some slightly different colors. That's a bit nicer. And we might change things so they can go fast. Max speed 10. And maybe their max force could be 0.5. Wow, now they're speedy guys. Make them slow turners but fast movers. So they feel like, it seems like they're less interested in each other now with this criteria. They just move a little bit. Yeah, okay. I might not do any more Boyd hacking right now. We'll get through got a few other slides to talk about today before we finish. So the broader question that I've raised today is why bother doing this kind of simulation? The concept I'm trying to communicate is that when you do simulation, the coding you do multiplies your creativity. So once you set up the system, have these coherence, spacing out, separating and flocking behaviors, you've done some work to sort out the simulation, but then you get the emergent behaviors for free, and they can be very powerful and very compelling in an interactive artwork. I ask rhetorically you to try doing that in Photoshop, Final Cut Pro, Premiere, or Ableton Live. Those pieces of software are great for being creative and creating something, but they don't let you create these kind of emergent behaviors. Really, maybe Ableton Live it has some things you can simulate, but you can't take something in Ableton, do one of it, and then say make me 1,000 of the same thing. It doesn't like you to do that. It likes you to make individual things and then copy them. So with P5 we could make one Boyd and then make 1,000 Boyds, and of course the computer slows down, but that's our limitation, is only the capacity of our computer and our algorithm to handle it, not the number of things that we should simulate. So a really powerful tool. I'm just going to talk a bit more broadly about creativity and artificial life and some interactive art that applies artificial life. Here's a concept for you. It's kind of framework for what is creativity. What is creativity? And Margaret Bowden is a famous creativity theorist who writes a lot about computational creativity. And she's written that there are 3 types of creativity, or 3 aspects of creativity. The novelty or newness of an idea or something. the utility of something, so whether it has value, if it's fit for purpose, and the surprise, right? Creativity involves surprise, things that you don't expect, things that are new, or new to you, not just new to the world. So the surprise is a hairy one. It's sometimes difficult to define that as easily as the others, but it's very important. And the point of saying this is that when you have some art that involves artificial life, that emergent behaviors, that gives you the surprise. These systems aren't just, they shouldn't be so compelling given the simple rules you implement, but they just are. They just end up being compelling, which is really, really cool when you create art that uses them. So feel free to read more about what Margaret Bowden's written about creativity and artificial life. Fascinating article there. So a few examples of artificial life art. These are creative, interesting systems. I guess the question is, can the artificial life part of it display some creativity which is independent of the artist that's created them and of the viewer who's experiencing them and contributing some interaction? We can see some examples here. This is a work by Therese Schubert called Sounds for Fungi, Homage to Indeterminacy. And Therese Schubert has a portfolio or a career working with biological systems, studying biological systems as part of her art practice. And she's studied how fungi grow, and in particular how fungi grow in the presence of sound. So different kinds of sounds can stimulate or hinder growth in certain ways, which is found fascinating. So she designed an artwork to simulate the process of fungi growth. And you can see that on the screen there. That's a picture of the simulated fungus mycelium network growing in a medium. And the viewer can control to some extent or influence the kind of sounds that are played back to that fungi network. And you hear the sounds as well, so it's a sound artwork as well. And that influences how it grows over time. So you can see there's a little notch down here. Oops, the notch down here. That's where there's a hand sensor, so you can put your hands over this artwork and influence that environment. And the way that this is presented in the gallery kind of suggests that it relates to sound. Having the sound deadening material is part of the set dressing for that. A really interesting artwork. And there's a link here, you can learn more about it. Here's another work from Therese Schubert. This is actually a cellular autonoma piece, similar to the game of life, but on a really big scale, a big scale. It's called Always Dead and Alive, and it's I think it's not sure that it's interactive. It might just exist on it by itself, an emergent artwork, a generative artwork, and it is this huge cellular autonoma rendered for 8K video and projected into a huge gallery space with people, a small, watching this massive video with all of these little dots that represent different life forms. So this is a 2019 work. So the game of life concept has been around for a long time, but artists are still developing it and finding new ways to experiment with it. And what I like about this one is that it's not locked to that. It doesn't use the cells as a kind of a way of framing it. It's escaped the cells. So whether there are cells there that just haven't been drawn in, or whether there's a more advanced way of recognizing the neighborhood between different little micro life forms here, or if there's some other way of framing this artwork technically, but it doesn't look like a game of life artwork, which is really cool. This is an example in a bit of the maybe too weird for you category. Heliotropica by Juan Manuel Castro, a 2018 artwork. This is sort of in the ALife biological life hybrid. So it involves a computer visualization, which I think is here and here, a sound artwork, so there's sounds being played through speakers, probably back here as well. There's some kind of sensor that senses where people are, or it gives them a way to interact with a touch screen. And also somewhere there's a real living creature, this little microscopic microorganism that lives under a microscope, and then it has a reacts to the sounds and lights being played to it, and then it's having some camera look at it and display it and sense it and use its movements and its growth and its behaviors as part of the artwork. So it's a hybrid between real life and artificial art, computer art techniques. And I encourage you to go and look at some of the strange and wonderful things that Juan Castro does with biology and art. Yeah, another example. This is not exactly interactive art, but it's a different ALife bio-inspired art technique, which I haven't discussed, called ant colony optimization. And the concept with an ant colony model is that you have a space where some creature can move, and as those creatures move, the more they move across a line, then the more that line gets colored in. So ants can move around the world and they sort of form a trail towards a food source, and then they erode that trail and gather on that trail, and you see the pattern of ants moving over a surface as they're laying pheromones and following these trails. So these are different approaches from different artists to using ant colony optimizations to draw things. This first one's actually by an Australian artist called Stephen Barris. And this one is sort of representative, although it's quite odd. The sort of artificial ants in this instance are encouraged by some measure or some control function to try to approximate a picture that they're seeing. And they're seeing a picture of a dancer and trying to represent that picture. So there's an article here by Gary Greenfield and Pinosal Machado discussing these concepts and how ant colony optimizations can be used in visual art. A bit of further reading, because we're getting to the end of our lecture time for today. I've found a few journal articles and papers related to how artificial life and simulation can play into creativity, not just art, but also just the broad concept of creativity. And I've put these here, but also listed them in the bibliography for this course. So if you are looking for some more inspirational material, check out this bibliography. I know it's a lot of words here, but you can find resources here that might stimulate your imagination. And really that's what I'm trying to do at this stage of the course, is just open your minds to different concepts within art and interaction computing. Next week, we will have one more lecture for this course. We will have a lecture on Monday, and that's it. The Monday lecture, many people are interested in machine learning as a concept in general. We don't have time in this course to cover machine learning art, but at least I can do one lecture on it. So the week 12 lecture will be on using machine learning techniques within P5, and I'm really happy to be able to bring that to you. That will just be on Monday, and then for the rest of that week, you'll just be directed towards your assignments. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you were live online, or if you were not, I will see you folks on Monday. Good luck with all of your tasks and work that you're no doubt doing. See you then.